Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session, Switching It Up. My name is Lillian Dabney, and I am the Adult Services Librarian for the Seattle Athenaeum, and I'll be your moderator for this session, which highlights authors venturing out into new and different writing territory. I am pleased to welcome this wonderful panel. Rachel Joyce is here with The Homemade God, Dial Press Penguin Random House. Rachel's new novel centers on four siblings who have gathered at their family lake house to seek answers about their father, a famous artist who has recently married a much younger woman, and decamped to the home to complete his long-awaited masterpiece. Laura Lippman is here with Murder Takes a Vacation, William Morrow, HarperCollins. Laura's latest mystery feature Laura Lippman's latest mystery features Mrs. Muriel Blossom, a former PI and middle-aged widow whose luxury trip on a Parisian river cruise requires rejuvenation of her detective skills in more ways than one. Ken Liu is here with All That We See or Seem, Saga Press, Simon & Schuster. Ken Liu's new novel is the first of a brand new trilogy, a science fiction techno-thriller that introduces us to Julia Z, a young woman who became known at 14 as the orphan hacker. Along with her bot Talos, she is thrust into a high-stakes adventure where she must use her AI whispering skills to solve a virtual reality mystery and rescue a kidnapped dream artist. Sarah MacLean is here with These Summer Storms, Ballantine Books, Penguin Random House. Sarah is here with her first foray into contemporary fiction with a sharp, sensuous novel about a wealthy New England's family's long overdue reckoning with hidden secrets and desires that threaten to fracture their family and their lives. And Adriana Trigiani is here with The View from Lake Como, Dutton, Penguin Random House. Adriana's latest novel is the story of one woman, her boisterous, loving Italian family, and her determination to live the creative life on her own terms. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Lillian.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you here. I'm sorry, Laura, you're going to say something?
It's like, thanks for having us. Nice to
Oh,
see you.
okay. Very good. Very good. So, Rachel, I'll start with you. My first question. There are four siblings in this novel, Netta, Susan, Goose, and Iris. And they're one big happy family, yet unhappy in their own ways. They're deeply connected and seemingly unconnected. So what is the role of connection in this big-hearted, warm family?
It's so much a novel about connect and disconnect. And as you say, it's four siblings who've grown up very, very closely because their mothers died young and their father is a very dynamic, quite, a big ego of an artist. So they've kind of grown up in, I'd say, in the patriarchy, big time. And their whole lives have been really about maintaining the myth of their father as this amazing artist. And he is an amazingly successful artist. So this book is really about how, as an individual, you can disconnect, what it takes to disconnect, and yet how necessary it is to kind of find yourself as an individual when you are so happily and successfully part of a unit, what it takes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a warm family. As I was reading it, I wanted to be part of their family and join the siblings. They were amazing, really, really fun. So
Good.
thank you.
They'd love to have you.
Thank you. And Laura, what inspired you to move away from the famous Tess Monahan to a 60-year-old Mrs. Blossom?
Well, my own 60s had something to do with it. I had published a book in 2023 that centered on three really, really unpleasant people. Even the most sympathetic character wasn't particularly likable. And I just wanted to set for myself sort of an escapist course. Muriel Blossom was a minor character in the Tess Monahan books. And I had some feedback from readers that my early portrayals of her were kind of ageist. And I had based her on the time, I mean, I created her when I was in my 40s. And I thought, well, no, she's like my mom. My mom is really anti-tech, but smart and savvy. But as I approached Muriel's age, and we're only 2 years apart now, I was like, I could do better at this. And, the fact that I'm in my 60s doesn't mean I'm not ageist. I think I still have to struggle with my own ageism. We live in a very ageist culture. And the big inspiration is I was watching a favorite film for probably the 7th, 8th time, Charade. I was like, what would this be like if the man were young and lovely, and it was the woman who was older, but in some ways savvier? And, the hunt for an object, which I think is just such a sturdy mystery tale. So all of that was in the mix. It was, I mean, I had to learn what I think so many people know, is that traditional mystery is so-called cozy, so light, so effervescent. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. It's like, wow, this is so much tougher, because you can't always send a man through the door with a gun.
Right.
You have to be softer, you have to be smarter. But the main pleasure of writing it was Muriel Blossom is a really good company. I would be her friend. I would hang out with her. And it was, in a way, kind of humbling to learn the depths of a character that you thought you had created. It was like, okay, you can, and it makes me wonder what other characters in my universe I could do better by.
Yeah. And she's such a full character. She steps up for herself. She doesn't, she doesn't suffer fools. So she's really, really, I'm glad you brought her back.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And Ken, what was your inspiration for this novel, and what drew you to have a more scientific narrative?
Well, my background as a technologist, and I'd always written science fiction. So I wanted to write something much more thriller-ish, something a little bit more plot-driven, if you will. And what motivated me to create Julia Z was I'm very interested in characters who are very resourceful and who try to solve problems in unconventional ways. So in thrillers, right, typically you have a hero who I think it's often the case, I wouldn't say always, but often the case that a lot of thrillers feature heroes who resort to violence as the solution to problems. It's the sort of thing that you see in movies, TV shows, and so on. And I wanted to create somebody who does not go to that as their go-to. Julia is not someone who goes around with a gun. She doesn't. Violence is not the first thing she thinks of. She tries to solve problems using her technical skills and her ability to come up with new solutions. And combine that with my love of technology and this moment where technology seems to be an even bigger piece of our lives, threat really in some ways to our well-being. Julia just seems like the right hero. I had a lot of fun writing her and telling her adventures.
Yeah. Was did that come natural? Was that a challenge to do like a propulsive thriller type novel?
It turned out to be surprisingly natural for me. At least I felt that way. I think a lot of science fiction stories are fundamentally engineering stories. So they are problem solving stories anyway. So a lot of that translates pretty well to a thriller context. I just said I had to sort of rethink the kind of emphasis that I wanted to give. And I'm much more interested in, the bad guys and how Julia tries to solve those. Anyway, I had a blast. I hope readers enjoy it too.
Yeah, and you can feel that when you read it. There's just a lot of energy to it. So yeah. All right, Sarah, welcome. Why the move away from historical romance to contemporary fiction?
Thanks for having me, everyone. It's not fully a move away in the sense that I'm still writing historical fiction. This isn't the
Okay.
future necessarily, but it was a book that really came to me during the pandemic. I was trapped in my apartment in New York City, and a really good friend said, "Why don't you come and stay on the beach in Rhode Island with us for the summer?" And that, if you remember, the summer of 2020 was like the greatest gift anyone could give us. And it was this like beautiful beach cottage on the water in Rhode Island, which is where I grew up. And Rhode Island has this really beautiful setting where the state is split by this bay, and in the bay are a collection of islands filled with they're all private, and you can't get to any of them unless you know somebody who lives on them. And some of them have these really big, beautiful kind of Gothic houses on them. And I started to become, some people got really into sourdough bread during the pandemic, and I got really into these islands. And what would it mean to live on one of these islands, and what kind of families would live on these islands, and what are the secrets that these islands would hold? And so, the family that came to me was a family that was modern. It was a tech billionaire who dies, and his 4 children, Rachel, were in the same boat, who come home in the wake of his death, only to discover that among, kind of having to deal with the dysfunctional chaos of being born into a family like this, they also have to deal with an inheritance game that he's left for them as his sort of like final gift / punishment as a controlling character. And this story was not a historical story. It was a very contemporary story in a place that I love very much. But it immediately made itself a MacLean novel, if that makes any sense to people. It still has, these sort of big characters, big feelings, this like wacky plot that, is far reaching, and a romance that runs right through it. But it was a big change because I realized I wasn't writing romance, and that was a surprise to me, not to anyone else who knew about the book, but it was a big surprise to me about 3/4 of the way through the manuscript. So
Yeah, and what a pleasant surprise.
yeah, I'm glad you feel so.
Yeah. I have no doubt that all your fans will enjoy this one as well. So yeah. And Adriana, the view from Lake Como, what inspired this very intimate portrait of a large, loving, extended Italian family?
Wow. Now I'm listening to these brilliant authors on this panel, and it's like Garanimals here. I should not be here.
Yes, you should.
I love all these authors, and I think their work is extraordinary. And you, Lillian, are our fearless leader today. I'm the daughter of a librarian, and everything for me, it's so interesting that we're talking about what are we doing differently, because it's true. We could switch a genre. That's a huge lift. It's a different thing, and it's hard to do. But this started with my great-grandmother, because basically what I write is our family stories.
Mm-hmm.
I fictionalize them. Sometimes they're a little really close to the bone. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's just a diving board. So for this diving board, it was a family business, which in my family is the thing. Like, we never went on vacation. We would only go north to my grandmother's house and wash people's cars in the summer. We didn't do anything. So I still have a little problem with vacation, which I think the other authors maybe can help me with, because I can't do it. I don't know how. So when I went to create this world, I knew that the character based on my great-grandmother was going to surprise me, because my great-grandmother did something so crazy and did something so nutty and then built a life on it. So she basically was engaged to one guy and got on the boat with my great-grandfather in 24 hours. Had 6 children. I know. So I have a cousin, Monica.
Amazing.
Okay, so I'm telling you, love is always around. So my cousin Monica, I'm on book tour outside of Philly, and she brings me. Now, you all know, Lillian, you know this. When we're on book tour, we're wearing the same pants for 8 days in a row. We're just trying to put on lipstick, except for Ken. We're trying to just look fresh. And she brings me this giant box of hats, shoes, my great grandmother's clothes, but in it was a nightgown with my grandmother's 125 years ago. The girls made nightgowns and they used their signature in red in Italy on the thing. It was like a fashion thing. So I had Giuseppina. So I kept walking around with this for 6 years going, what is this story? What is this story? And that's how I got there.
Mm.
And then I went to a wedding down in New Jersey and I went, I got to write about this because this is the Italian American Riviera. These people really turn it out. Everything's built of Carrara marble. There was the marble business. Then I went to Carrara. Then I went to Lake Como again. My people are from here, like
Yeah.
about 20 miles away. And so Lake Como was always a thing with me. And then there's Lake Como, New Jersey. So there you have it.
Yeah, yeah. Wow.
I know, really.
Is it a deeply personal story or
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And those are the novels I'm interested in reading. Now, I've been lucky
Okay.
enough to read some of our panelists' novels, and I love them because they feel personal. Like
Yeah.
if somebody's writing with a patina, like away from something, I go, okay, that's pretty, but I'm not
Mhm.
interested. But if I feel you in the work,
Mhm.
I don't know if you're this way, Lillian. I'm attracted to that. I'm
Mhm.
attracted to it. So with The View from Lake Como, so my great grandmother's story was she did something no woman in her family had ever done before. Sorry, that's my dog. She had Lola, go away. She had done something in her life that was completely, it was out of character. It was out of character for her. So the character of Jess Capa de Monte Barata, let me just make this clear. She's a draftsman in the marble company. She's recently divorced. She's living in her parents' basement. Why? And when you meet the man she divorced, you can't understand why she divorced him. It doesn't make any sense. And then as the novel unspools and
Yeah.
things begin to happen, as you know, she finds the answers, but it takes her a while.
Okay.
And she has to go to Italy to find them, where she's
Yeah.
never been. Yeah.
Thank you. That's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian.
All right, Rachel. There's a variety of relationships in your novel: familial, romantic, platonic. How do you approach characters with this vast dynamic of relationships, and how did you find the voice for each character?
Well, I mean, we're talking about kind of breaking away from genre, and I don't know that I'm necessarily breaking away from genre, but I did feel with this book that I was breaking into a new voice. And as a writer, it felt really important to me because I felt that I just finished the Harold Fry kind of trilogy, which had a very particular feel to it and a very particular energy. And when I got to the end, I put down my pen and I thought, that's it. That is done. And also that way of seeing the world is kind of done because it has been going on for 12, 13, 14 years now. And I am very definitely, as probably most of your panelists would agree, I'm not the writer I was 14 years ago. I'm not the same. I don't think in the same way. My children have grown up. So to expect myself to write in the same way felt like cutting myself short, like sort of, taking away things that I was beginning to sense were there. So I was very aware with this novel that I wanted to push it in a newer place. So that was part of the kind of, and also this novel demanded to be written in that way. It demanded that the characters were bigger, they're spikier, I'd say they're more intelligent, they're more questioning than I've written before. And they are also, as we've sort of been touching on with Sarah, they're kind of living in this period of lawlessness that I think happens in any family after any traumatic event, but particularly the loss of a father, where nobody really, you don't know who you are, but also you don't know who anybody else is, and they're your family. So they're familiar, and yet they are completely like, who are these people? So that was why really the whole dynamic, the whole, the voice of the book, the choosing of the characters or the availability of the characters all became different. And it was really hard work because I didn't have my familiar way of writing, but I really didn't want my familiar way of writing. So it was a kind of double-edged challenge and it was a risk. And I remember saying to somebody at one point, do you know, I really don't know what I'm doing with this book. I really don't know if this is a mistake. And she said to me, art is risk. And I thought, well, what on earth am I thinking, worrying about whether or not this is it being, when I haven't even finished it, when I haven't even gone there yet and found it. So in order to find it, I did, in really now, in answer to the question, I did a lot of listening, and I did a lot of writing before I wrote the book, where I just wrote whatever came into my head about the characters, to try and learn who they were and how they spoke and what they thought and how their speech patterns were different and how their energies were different. And then I abandoned, I would say, 80% of that. But it was like getting to know the book before you write the book. And it was an essential part of the whole challenge, really.
Yeah, and it was becoming a part of that family, and and going through their grief process and their loss process. I think that may have been a part of it as well.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, each one has such a great voice. And
Thank you. And I also, while I have a voice, I will not let it be said that Adriana should be looking up to the rest of us. I'm just going to kind of like wipe that one off the floor.
All right, thank you. All right, Laura. Sorry.
Okay.
You have a unique setting for your novel, a river cruise. How did you decide on that setting, and what was your research like?
Well, that's just classic Agatha Christie, right?
Yeah.
Death on the Nile, why not? So I'm a huge fan of the writer Donald Westlake. He's probably best known for his books about the not entirely competent burglar John Dortmunder. He also wrote under the name Richard Stark. And he wrote, when he died, they couldn't get the number right in his obituary. It was like more than 100 novels. But I was a huge fan of a couple of sort of journalism, newspaper, tabloid books he'd written. And they struck me as better. I was a reporter, and Westlake's novels struck me as better than some novels written by reporters about reporters. And when I got a chance to meet him, he told me, I always believed in my imagination, and that if I thought hard enough, I'd get the details right. So when I started this novel about, a trip up the Seine, I was like, I don't have to go. I like basically stole an itinerary from a travel company. And I sat at my dining room table and I was like, I have Google, I have this, I have that, I have a huge imagination, I can do this. And then about 10, 12 months into the book, I scheduled the vacation for my daughter and me in June of 2020. It was in June of 2023. And I'm glad I did. I mean, I always, as a former reporter, I never want to romanticize research, and it can be a really bad rabbit hole. But when you do it, there are always these details that are so fantastic. So yes, I took a tax-deductible cruise. My accountant was very strict. I wasn't allowed to deduct my daughter's passage, only my own. But Adriana said something about how this panel of writers, in one way or another, have made ourselves vulnerable in these books, which I thought was a really brilliant insight. And I don't think I'd even thought about it for myself, but yeah, I made myself vulnerable in so many ways writing this book. And, a journey is such a hackneyed metaphor, but when you send a character on a journey, they really have to go on a journey, right? And at first blush, Muriel Blossom and I don't have that much in common besides our ages. She's led a much more sheltered life. She hasn't traveled very much. She's shy, she's self-conscious. But you know what? As a recently divorced woman writing about a widow, I was allowing myself to be vulnerable about what it's like to be single at a time in my life when I didn't expect to be single, what it's like just to be in your 60s, how you move through the world. I mean, it's not enough to make the observation that's been made so often that women of a certain age become invisible. They're not only invisible, people don't hear them, people don't respect them. And I found that it was just such a good way in this light-hearted caper at the same time. You know, there are depths to what she thinks about her own past, her own story. She's not a perfect person. She's made mistakes. And, you know, that was as much part of it, but I took so much from real life. There's a thing in the book where Muriel Blossom believes that the tour director is warning her about a steep climb. She's a fat woman, and I use that word very consciously. And having spent a lot of time talking to people and thinking about and reading about sort of our culture's fat phobia, and she's just so sure that he's staring her down and addressing all of his remarks to her about how difficult the climb is, about how steep the climb is. That happened to me on that trip. This tour director is just like locked on me, and I'm sitting there thinking, what is it about me? Why do you think I can't make it up the stairs? I still don't know. But so those are the kind of discoveries that I made. It wasn't so much about the itinerary or seeing Monet's water lilies. It was about allowing myself to see where Muriel and I were in sync as two women in our 60s.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's something that needs to be talked about, needs to be looked at, needs to just have a conversation about. So yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. And Ken, I wanted to ask you about science fiction, and do you think, how do you see it as a tool to explore deeply human issues, particularly when there is an AI component to your narrative?
Well, we live in a very strange time, right? I think all of us feel it in some way. There's the loneliness epidemic that's sweeping through Western societies, breaking down civil society in general. There's also the rise of ubiquitous surveillance and AI, much more so now than before. I think even 5 years ago, it wasn't quite as terrifying as it is. All of us are subject to algorithms, our credit scores, our profiles, the sort of data that various actors have on us and reduce us to those. And if you work, all of us on the panel are perhaps somewhat lucky in that what we do is somewhat isolated from this, but a lot of jobs now are subject to AI monitoring and the kind of stuff that reduces us to behave like machines. So I set my techno thriller to be 5 minutes in the future, but it really is talking about this moment where the issue is not so much machines replacing humans, but more humans are forced to behave like machines, which I think is the much bigger problem and the far more terrifying prospect. But at the same time, I'm not interested in writing stories that are just doom and gloom. I'm not particularly, it's not all that interesting to me. I'm far more interested in what, Laura and Adriana have both talked about, which is this vulnerability of being human, of being an artist, and this whole idea that what humans are interested in is the human element in art. I know, again, artists are terrified about the impact of AI, but I wanted to tell a story that's more positive. So in the first Julia Z book, what I'm telling is a story about how AI can actually become a technology medium for human expression, in the same way that all past technological revolutions have ended up being ways for humans to express ourselves. The camera certainly destroyed a bunch of artistic careers, but also enabled the rise of cinema as a brilliant new medium for very human stories to be told. And I envision how AI can become a new medium for artists. And so the first victim, if you will, that Julia has to help is an artist whose medium is AI, and she creates these beautiful things that brings people together, that transcends loneliness, that allows there to be a renaissance of civil society. And of course, some people are very threatened by that, and they want to take her down. And Julia has to go in and help her. And her ability to understand how AI works and to understand the technical underpinnings of of the technology allows her to turn it into a tool of liberation. And I think the potential for technology to be both the instrument of our oppression, but also liberation, is what I find to be deeply hopeful about a story like this.
Yeah, yeah, it comes across. It really comes across in the narrative. Do you do you how can I phrase this? In what way do you see science fiction as a tool for also for exploring existential philosophical questions?
I mean, my view as a technologist is that it's not helpful to think of technology as something opposed to human nature. I think we have this idea that somehow to be more human, we have to just get rid of the technology. I don't think that's actually true. I think technology is nothing more than the external manifestation of human nature. These things are invented by humans, and so they show our imprint. What I think can be done here is to use the technology as a way to explore human nature. And I think of technology as a story, really.
Yeah.
The kind of technology societies produce say something about who they are. The sort of cities we build. When we build cities that are oriented around cars, it shows what kind of people we are, what sort of values we place high. When you go visit, very old cities in Europe or in India, you'll see that these are very human-centric cities. These are cities designed around humans walking around in a community, humans knowing each other, humans being face to face, humans not able to hide behind keyboards to say terrible things about each other. And I think that kind of city, that kind of technology reflects the people who live in them. So, I use technology in my thrillers as a way to explore what kind of messages do we want to say to the universe? Who are we?
Mhm.
The technologies we build are, a message of who we are, and that matters.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, all right. Thank you. Sarah, yeah, the time period in your novel is entirely contemporary. It is now. But it also has the feel of a early 20th century with trains and a Gilded Age manor house. So was that intentional? And is there something about that time period that attracts you?
Absolutely, it was intentional. Listening to Ken talk, I was thinking about writing billionaires, right? When you take on a billionaire in 2025, you're taking on a very particular kind of story. Even if you come at it thinking you're going to write a dysfunctional family in the midst of chaos, in the wake of grief, all these things. The reality is I wrote an inheritance story because these kids are all in battle for billions, literal billions. And it's very difficult to look at today as somebody who has spent her whole career thinking about history without thinking about the robber barons of the Gilded Age here in the United States. And so I was really interested in giving people a sense of course, place. Rhode Island is full of those enormous mansions that were referred to as country cottages by the Vanderbilts and the Carnegies and others, but also this sort of question of should billionaires exist, right? Is not it's through the entire book. There's this sort of big question of who are these people? Why are they so terrible? This is not a family that treats each other very well, and they are really looking for to get their own. They're looking to get theirs throughout the book, and so the question is, how can we learn from the past? How can we think about wealth in a different way? How can we think about how people survive without wealth? How can we think about the threat of wealth, both in society and personally? And the Gilded Age was asking that question over and over again. I mean, so it felt very natural to me to start the book on a train, to talk about the Vanderbilts to bring, and it doesn't hurt that the history of Rhode Island, the actual landscape of Rhode Island was drastically shifted in the 1870s and 80s by these men and their wealth. So, but it was a great time, honestly. I did not go on a cruise like Laura, but I did spend a lot of time like sneaking around like big houses in Rhode Island and thinking about that.
Yeah, the dawn of the 20th century was a really pivotal time in American history, and very rich to explore. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I keep saying over and over again, like where Carnegie was terrible, right? He had all this wealth, but like we also got the New York Public Library out of him. So what are our billionaires doing? It seems not great is maybe where I would land on that.
Thank you. All right, Adriana. Craftsmanship plays a big role. You mentioned the marble artist and the quarry. Is there a parallel between these artists and your own craft as a writer?
Oh, I think there is. I mean, I come from people that survive by the labor of their own hands. So to be a writer, now I mentioned my mom was a librarian, so that, to me, she inculcated in me like how important it was to go to the library. And I'm sitting here listening to these stories about these books, and I'm kind of having a little epiphany here, Lillian. I'm going, every story is very different, and perhaps even the authors themselves would say they stretched in certain directions to tell these stories. But I find these subjects completely relatable. I mean, you don't, I had to study the marble, the world of the marble. I had to go to the places where the marble sheared off the mountain and really connect to the stone of it. And then realize when I went in somebody's bathroom in New Jersey that they had the marble from Carrara there. Now so that whole thing became interesting to me. And as I'm listening to the stories, and what connects us is that we create a world, and in that world, something is being made. Something's being made. And sometimes it's relationships. Sometimes it's many layered process. I mean, Sarah's talking about billionaires. I can't relate to those people. I really can't. I'm trying to, because our job as novelists is to get people to empathize, to get around it. When Ken talks about in a techno world, that can seem very cold. It's his job, and evidently he did it expertly, is to get in there and find out what are the human emotions, what's the human charting that's going on in there that we can relate to it. If you're talking about a family, and we talk about Rachel's, now Rachel's book, I read it recently, so it's like on my mind. She shaped this family to me, which this never happened to me, but I always wondered if my mom died first, would my father remarry and I would kill myself? Okay, I'm just telling you, Rachel. So your story it piqued me. I was in there. Laura's craftsmanship is superb. I mean, the nature of this panel is that we're kind of talking about the genre in a certain way, but eventually those genres, when we're in them, we start to need other genres, which is where the librarians come in, because they guide the reader, say, hey, this is something new and different. And all of this, when we're writing in the moment, it's about these weird times we're living in. But you make a great point. At the turn of the last century, there were all these, the cotton gin, airplanes, cars, telephones. In 100 years, people will look back at this time and go, wow, the technological age arrived. But every invention requires morality and should be guided by a moral compass. And right now, we're out there, we can't find it. It doesn't appear to exist. It's money for money's sake, billions to protect my family, not yours. That's the difference. That's the difference. Also, keep in mind, people weren't taxed at the turn of the last century. So the Vanderbilts and those folks, they could accumulate, the Rockefellers could accumulate great wealth without having, it was those people that said, hey, we got to do something for the suffering of mankind. Our library system, like, I actually think we should write letters to these folks and go, hey, do you want to help the libraries? We just found out that the funding was cut. This is unconscionable. That means that those people are so far removed from the experience of real people, which includes us, by the way, because we're authors who were like, hey, it could tip either way at any moment, and we know it. So we're fighting for our lives out here too. We get it. We understand, we get it. But there has to be a commitment to truth and beauty and knowledge and art and creativity. And leave it to the artists to recreate. We'll do it for you, Lillian. We will make that happen. But we have to feel or see demonstrated a commitment to it. We can't just assume that our public library is going to be there anymore. And interestingly, in our communities, I'm sorry, I'm kind of going deep here. I don't mean to, but I kind of am. How essential the public library is to a community. The brick and mortar public library, it serves children, it serves people in the middle. Does everybody know that the elderly leave their assisted living and go to the library every day? I check whenever I'm touring. I check, it's happening. If they don't have a computer at home, they become tech savvy, Ken, by going to the library and using it. They don't have it at home. So, this now suddenly the public library has turned into God's work. Now, how do we get those people to see when they shred the Institute of Museums and Libraries and the funding? How do we get them to understand how personal it is? Mm-hmm. That's our job as novelists and creators, is to say, hey, take a look at this, because I guarantee you, and it's probably in Sarah's novel, those billionaires, somebody came to them and said, hey, good for you that you own all the trains in the country, or good for you, Mr. Henry Ford, that you're building all the cars. What are you going to do for the people? What are you going to do for the people? And that's where we are as artists. We're for the people.
Yeah. And thank you so much for being an advocate for librarians. It's like the last bastion of democracy. So thank you.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
All right. Rachel, wanted to ask you about Vic Camp, the patriarch of this family, and his new wife, Bella May. Both of them are, still talking about artists. Both of them are self-made artists. Did you research any particular artistic style or time period for the novel? They're very unique artists, so I'm interested in how you came upon them and how you created them.
Well, they they develop over time as characters. The more you're with them, the more you find out about them, and the more you realize that they have to offer to the book. And Vic certainly is, I had a lot of, I don't want to say fun, but I had to create in my mind the paintings that the reader sees. So, and I'm not an artist, so I spent a lot of time looking. God, there are so many of that type of painting. It's kind of the Jack Vetriano school of painting, I would say, which is very popular, certainly in the UK. It's not to my taste. It's semi-pornographic. It's normally men. And if they're not standing by expensive cars, they're standing by women with not really very much on. That seems to me what those paintings are about. But they are phenomenally popular. And they've been kind of heralded as art for the people, which really interests me when there is so much art for the people that isn't doing that. But also that art, it seems to me, does not ask any questions about art. And so this is an artist who is so consumed, and this is my artist that I've created. I'm not going to say that any other artists are this, but that he was so consumed by his own ego and by his own need to actually be recognized by the establishment, which is the one place he kind of feels that he, if only he was exhibited in the Tate or the National Gallery, he would have achieved what he wanted, but he will never be. And that is his Achilles heel. So there you have him as an artist. And then you have the woman he marries, who's much, much younger than him. And the siblings don't meet until halfway through the book. And we don't meet until halfway through the book. So it becomes a story really about illusion, about projections, about prejudice, about misconceptions, about preconceptions, as we learn more and more about her as a person and question whether or not she is an artist. But for me, she is a true artist because she takes what she sees and she reflects it absolutely back. And that was the kind of, that was always the arc of the narrative, really, was how far do you play with a kind of my cousin Rachel kind of character in Daphne du Maurier, how brilliant she was at kind of bringing on those characters that you just don't know where they belong. And she throws the whole book into turmoil. And also she doesn't even come on, as I said, until halfway through. So she's a kind of creator of images. And that interests me as writers, what we choose to reflect back, and whether we give people what we feel they want, in sort of syrupy dollops, or do we challenge them more? Do we ask people to look at the state of things and reassess, break free?
Yeah, the pacing you created with introducing Bellamy, the younger woman, was brilliant. And it really was like sort of kept us on the edge of our seat. And then also questioning just like the family. So
I did at one point Google, because I got so insecure, we all do, about our writing, and I like, can you leave a main character till halfway through the book? And everywhere I looked, it said, no, you absolutely can't. And so I thought, right, that's what I will do then.
yeah. Good for you. Good for you. All right. Laura, your novel has so many unanticipated twists and turns. How do you go about structuring your narrative to catch the readers caught off guard and take them by surprise?
I'm what I call kind of a distant shore school of writing. I'm a pantser. I don't work from an outline. There's a big secret, and I think I know the big secret, but it's like you're getting in a boat and crossing a body of water, and I don't know the currents, and I don't know how sturdy the boat is. And as I get closer, I was like, oh, from far away, that looked like a dinosaur, but it's really just a big dog. It's just so, it's a really unglamorous answer. I write a lot of drafts.
Okay.
I write a lot of drafts, and I see that. I thought this book would be easy because the itinerary forced the structure. It had to begin at the beginning of the trip, and again, I know better than this. I know better than to ever go into a writing project thinking it's going to be easy. And I've often told myself that if I'm ever in the middle of writing a book and I think it's easy, that's when I know I should quit. It's just not supposed to be easy. So I think this is going to sound so counterintuitive. I think I write a lot of twists because I don't think about writing twist. I'm not writing twist. I'm writing about a woman on a trip, and then this happens and this happens. And what if this happened? And I'm just, especially in this book, which has a very, close third person POV, just like, what's going to happen to her next? And how is she going to respond? And how quickly will she figure things out? And I know we were talking to a group of wonderful librarians, but there are always writers everywhere, or people who want to write. And I just don't think I can stress enough how unglamorous and how non-muse adjacent it is. Like, I don't have a muse. We just show up, and it's grubby work. It's grubby, silly, redundant, frustrating, challenging work, but I couldn't be happier to have it as my job.
Right. Yeah. With all of that, it's still something that you love to do.
Oh, I try to be consciously grateful every day that I got to do this for a living, because it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
know a lot of young people who are trying to be writers, and it's harder. They're right. It is harder. So yeah, I'm grateful every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. All right. And Ken, did you knew that this was that this beginning novel was going to be a part of a trilogy? And do you have it mapped out, or you're mapping it as you go?
Oh, I'll just quickly answer that. It's not a trilogy. It's just it's an open-ended series. The books
Oh,
can be
okay.
read in any order. It's a
Okay.
thriller series, so in typical fashion, people can come in with any book. It's just a Julia Z adventure.
I
So
see.
each book is entirely separate, independent.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right. Well, that answers that. Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah. And Sarah, romantic tension is just a key element in your novels. Tell me what makes for a compelling slow burn romance, and how do you create that tension?
There's a great romance adage. This is sort of a quick one. There's a great romance adage that if your hero is a firefighter, your heroine had better be an arsonist. And so, and I have used that for, 20 books. It doesn't matter if I'm writing romance or a work of commercial fiction or something else entirely. The work is to make sure that if one character is on the page, the character they're going to fall for is absolutely in their face, ruining everything the whole way. It's even better if it's a hero who needs to suffer. And
Yeah.
so that's it. And so it
All
just
right.
takes time for them to fall in
Yeah.
love.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right. Adriana, journaling, it was a big part of this novel too. And tell me what comments you're making about journaling and why you included it.
Well, I wanted to make, or at least lead you into the story. Almost, she's not a writer, but whenever something really bad happens, the first thing the teacher or the librarian or the parent or somebody will say is write it down. Just start writing, get it out, right? So this woman had never done that. And so she gets into online therapy. And I found it in a funny way, which is another day and time, but just suffice it to say, I invented based on a therapy that you could get online, but I created my own because I thought it would be funny if every time you checked in, it was a different therapist. So you'd have to go through the whole thing again, what your problem was. So I called mine TheraMe. And so because she's in a family that doesn't believe in this stuff, they don't want her to, they don't want her to leave town. And when you find out the thing, her mother says at one point, it's like when your child leaves you, it's like you lose a thumb. Like you can't imagine. And then another kid leaves, you lose the other thumb. And so it goes, right? So Jess has to become who she is on her own terms. And evidently, this is one of the hardest things for people to do, is to not live with people's expectations or to behave in a way that makes other people happy or to make decisions that make other people happy. They have to find it. Sarah, you just unlocked me. I wrote down what you said about the arsonist. That really helps me.
You're welcome.
Thank you. No, because it sort of clarifies tension.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, the hardest part of writing a book. And I just want to throw this out there. Lillian, don't hate me to the panel, but this is something that, and I want you to answer this too, Lillian, because I'm really curious about this. People always say to me that I have a very simple style. So one time I was in a library on tour. I was chit-chatting with the librarian.
Adrian, I'm getting messages.
Oh, we have to stop?
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I'm so sorry.
let's put a pin in it.
Talk about tension, though.
I know. Well, we get a little wrap up later. We could debrief, but I'll just quickly throw it out there, which is what you read as a child becomes your style.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you said that. Thank you. And you know, you guys are amazing exploring. I mean, taking a chance, exploring something new and different, just doing something different is really what it's all about and what we look forward to. And it creates a new energy. So thank you so much. You're an amazing panel. Really,
Lillian.
really amazing.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Lillian. Thank you, Library Journal. Thank you, my fellow authors.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.